On March 8, 2014, at 12:42 a.m., a Malaysia Airlines plane took off. On board were 227 passengers and 12 crew members, making a total of 239 people on the plane. It departed from Kuala Lumpur Airport in Malaysia, heading to Beijing, China. Normally, a flight like this, aboard a Boeing 777, takes about 6 hours. Passengers would typically spend the time sleeping or watching the latest Fast and Furious movie with Vin Diesel, only to wake up to a meal, maybe beef or chicken. When they wake up, they'll start their day as they land in Beijing. The next morning, the plane should be in contact with the Malaysian air traffic control system. Why? Because someone needs to make sure everything is all right up there in the sky. You might think it's simple, but no, it's not. Airports around the world launch flights at the same time. The reason we don't have mid-air collisions is because each country has its own air traffic control system that oversees its airspace. This system tracks information like flight numbers, aircraft speed, altitude, and more. These details are monitored in real time. The air traffic controller uses this data to give instructions about the flight path, ensuring that the aircraft stays on course without veering off track or triggering any radars. This is all done to prevent collisions and to keep air traffic under control. Now back to our flight. 10 minutes after takeoff, Malaysian air traffic control clears our plane to climb to 35000 feet, which will be its cruising altitude for the rest of the flight. At 1 a.m., the plane is on the correct route and altitude, heading toward Beijing. The plane continued on its way, and just as it was about to exit Malaysian airspace and enter Vietnamese airspace, Malaysian Air Traffic Control made a routine call to the pilot. "Hello, Captain, just letting you know you're exiting our airspace. Please contact Vietnamese control. Bye-bye." The pilot, receiving the request, responds, "Okay, no worries, I'll contact Vietnamese control. Bye-bye." Unfortunately, bye-bye turned out to be the last word the pilot would say over the radio, because the plane vanished, disappearing off radar. Yes, the plane disappeared. It was never heard from again. The disappearance of the plane from radar screens meant that it stopped transmitting its information. This could happen for simple reasons, like a failure in the communication system, or it could be something much more serious, like a fire or a catastrophic event that destroyed part or even the entire plane. About 20 minutes after the plane's disappearance, around 2:40 a.m., Vietnamese air traffic control contacted Malaysian control to ask, "Hey, didn't you send a plane our way? Why hasn't it arrived? Is the plane that left Malaysia missing?" The truth was, Malaysia Airlines was now receiving some terrifying news. Normally, a routine message is sent every half hour from the plane, but there were no messages coming through. Even the regular updates that were supposed to arrive every 30 minutes didn't come. That's when everyone started to realize that something was seriously wrong. Both Malaysian and Vietnamese air traffic systems tried every possible frequency to get in touch with the plane, and all nearby aircraft were instructed to help in trying to reach the missing Malaysian plane. But my friend, there was no response. At this point, we ruled out simple malfunctions or human error. Those scenarios were no longer on the table. Now we were moving toward more frightening possibilities. If all communication systems fail, that means there's a major issue with the plane. It could be something like a power failure, a loss of electricity, a fire, an explosion, or a catastrophic event. The only hope left before Malaysia Airlines could officially announce the devastating news was to wait for the plane's scheduled landing time. Let's wait until it gets to Beijing at 6:30 a.m. Maybe the plane just couldn't contact Vietnam or China, but hopefully it'll still land on time, or at least make an emergency landing at a nearby airport. But by 7:15 a.m., the plane still hadn't arrived in Beijing or appeared at any other airport. At that point, the airline held a press conference and announced the loss of flight MH370, and search and rescue efforts began in the South China Sea, where the plane was last seen on radar. At that moment, everyone assumed there was some kind of disaster that caused the plane to suddenly crash in this area. And then the next day, when the news about the plane was delivered to the press, they would also roar that the airport had been crashed. While the airline was facing the devastation of the families and announcing the names of the passengers, investigators were trying to understand what could have caused such a sudden disappearance. Was it a terrorist attack? A technical failure in the plane's control systems? A problem with the plane's structure?
Who are you? Get out of here.
What you may not know, my friend, is that at this point, the Malaysian plane wasn't at the bottom of the South China Sea. It was still flying at 400 feet, and the passengers were inside, probably unaware of anything unusual. The plane was still in the air. So how, my friend, could the plane still be flying when it was supposed to land in Beijing at 6:30 a.m.? We waited until 7:15 a.m. and still nothing appeared. We expected the plane to have crashed into the South China Sea, but that didn't happen. We discovered that the plane was still airborne and the passengers were alive. This was because the Malaysian plane still had enough fuel to stay in the air for another 2 hours, beyond its scheduled landing time. By 9 a.m. on March 8th, we were certain the plane had to be either on the ground or in the sea, whether it made a landing or ran out of fuel. But my friend, whether it landed at 6 a.m. or 9 a.m., the question remains, where is the plane? Where did it go? That, my friend, is the important question, and the real mystery lay in its path. The events began to slowly unfold on March 9th, a full day after the plane's disappearance. Malaysian officials directed the search toward the Andaman Sea near Indonesia. This area wasn't anywhere near the plane's flight path, but the reason they focused the search there was that Malaysian military radar had detected an aircraft veering off its course and entering the Malacca Strait. It continued along its path, and when the military radar picked it up, they didn't know it was the missing plane. That's because military radar operates differently. Unlike air traffic control, military radar doesn't receive data directly from the plane. It's a traditional radar system that works using radio waves. It detects any moving object, even flying birds, but it can't identify the nature of the object it detects. It just sees a moving point? Let me tell you, my friend, that in the case of our plane, something strange happened. The plane veered off course, but it veered in a way that kept it within Malaysian airspace, the space the plane was authorized to fly through. So even though the radar saw it turning, it assumed it was just an emergency situation, with the pilot turning back to land. The radar didn't raise alarms because the plane was still within the airspace it was allowed to be in. Plus, the plane's path could have led it into Thai airspace, which it wasn't authorized to enter, and which could have led to a military response. But the plane made a sharp turn that kept it within Malaysian airspace, avoiding any new airspace. The flight continued within Malaysian airspace until the radar's range ended. That, my friend, was the last radar that picked up our plane. But my dear, can all of this be mere coincidence? Of course not. The change in the flight path completely changed the investigation, because initially, the investigators thought it might be a malfunction, terrorism, or a fire. But now, the situation has changed entirely. It seems the Malaysian plane had a very clever will behind it. Someone seems to have planned it very well to do something crazy, because it's impossible for it to be a coincidence that the communication systems failed at the exact moment the plane was about to enter the airspace between two countries, causing both nations to believe that the plane belonged to the other. This isn't just coincidence. As soon as the communication was cut off, the flight path changed. It seems like a plan was made so that no one would ever expect where the plane would be, and the plane continued flying on this path, staying within Malaysian airspace until it was beyond the range of the last radar that could track it. So what's the crazy thing this mad pilot wanted to do? It seems someone wanted to disappear, taking one of the world's largest passenger planes with them. The scary part is that this plan actually worked 100%. Once the plane exited Malaysian airspace, and when it managed to avoid being tracked by any radar, it had enough fuel to fly for another 6 hours. This would allow it to reach anywhere without being detected in the sky and without any surveillance, as long as it stayed away from radar coverage. Whoever came up with this plan succeeded, and it's a surprise for us, my dear. Planes can disappear entirely, and there might be no trace left. Wait a minute. You said there was an electrical failure that led to the communication systems cutting off completely, but how did the plane keep flying without electricity? Since we started to suspect this might be intentional, the electrical failure might have been deliberately caused by the pilot or someone in the cockpit. Disconnecting the electricity entirely would cause the communication systems to shut down suddenly, as if there was a technical issue with the plane. I decided to ask Jordan, as if there was a technical issue with the plane. Meanwhile, the navigation systems would still operate because the plane couldn't withstand total electrical failure. After some time, the plane's screens would go dark, and controlling the plane would be nearly impossible. But For sure, the person controlling the plane wouldn't allow this to happen. So, we can be sure that the electricity would be restored. The crucial thing is that once the plane was off the radar, the power came back on, allowing the plane to be controlled for the next 6 hours. And indeed, my dear, that's exactly what happened. After the plane left Malaysian airspace, the main power came back on. But how did we know the power was back? The plane had a satellite communication system. Do you remember when I told you the plane sends a signal to the airline every half hour? Well, this system connects to the satellite. When the power goes out and then returns, it's just like a router restarting. It reconnects to the satellite, preparing to resume its function. It doesn't send or receive any data, it's just logging in. This would confirm to the investigators that the power was intentionally cut off, not due to a malfunction. And, most importantly, it would give us information about the plane's location, as the satellite sends a message which is received by a mobile phone. By comparing the time of sending and receiving, we can determine how long it took for the message to reach the phone, and if we know the speed of the message, we can figure out the distance traveled from the satellite to the phone. The speed of the message is the speed of light. The phone's calculation of distance won't pinpoint the exact location, but it will give us a circle of possibilities. To be sure, we need to contact another satellite to get another distance measurement, forming a second circle. This gives us 2 possible locations. To pinpoint the exact location, we need a third satellite to create a third circle. Unfortunately, communication satellites typically only give 1 circle, not an exact location. But in the case of our plane, we needed any information, even if it was a circle thousands of miles wide. At least we'd know the plane was somewhere within that circle, not inside it. And that, my dear, is a crucial piece of information in this mystery. Yes, the circle we drew was large, but we could easily rule out parts of it because they were very far away, and it's impossible for the plane's fuel to have reached those areas. This leads us to replace the circle with an arc, where the plane might be. We don't know the exact point on the arc, but we know the plane's location is somewhere on it. That was the first arc, and the plane kept sending automated messages every hour. So every hour we get a new arc. These messages continued for 6 hours until the fuel ran out, giving us 7 messages, each representing the plane's location at that time. By this, we knew the general path of the plane, though only roughly, and it hadn't gone beyond these 7 arcs. These arcs showed that after leaving Malaysian airspace, the plane headed south toward the Indian Ocean, one of the largest and most isolated oceans in the world. It's an ideal spot if you're thinking of disappearing forever. Also, my dear, from the 7th arc, we figured out that the plane was probably going down at that time, which coincided with the expected time for the fuel to run out. All these arcs were created by the Fletcher Corporation, previously Fletcher Healthcare, and Lookout became the 2nd largest hotel chain retailer in the world. Black Cherry Drive was created by the Fletcher Corporation, so the 7th arc wasn't just a stop in the flight, but the end point of the journey, the place where the plane likely crashed. The 7th arc became our hope to find the Malaysian plane, because any object that emits waves has a frequency. When these waves reach you, you hear them at the same frequency they were emitted from, assuming the object is stationary. But if the object is moving, like our plane, the frequency changes. If it's moving toward you, the frequency increases, and if it's moving away, it decreases. When we analyzed the wave from the 7th arc, compared to the previous 6, we found it was slightly slower. This suggests that the source of the wave, the plane was moving farther away from the satellite. This indicated the plane was heading towards the ocean at a high speed, confirming that the 7th arc marked the end of the flight. Initially, aerial surveys found no traces of the aircraft, so we had to search underwater. We went to Arc 7 and dived, searching an area that would cover 1,200 square kilometers, at a cost of millions of dollars. But we found no trace of a single piece of debris from an aircraft weighing 200 tons made of metal, plastic, and human beings. After all this effort, it seems that the will to hide a passenger plane succeeded. The person who tried to deceive the world, defy all monitoring, investigation, and search systems, continued the situation as it was until July 2015. On the shores of Reunion Island near Madagascar, off the coast of Africa, a small piece of a wing weighing no more than 80 kilograms appeared. This piece would raise suspicions, But these suspicions were not confirmed, as it was found 4,000 kilometers away from the area where the search had been conducted, in the Indian Ocean. Boeing analyzed the specifications of the piece and shocked the world by confirming, dear friend, that it was indeed part of the wing of the missing Malaysian plane. This, dear friend, was the first tangible evidence that our plane had crashed. And dear friend, I want to tell you that in March 2024, on the 10th anniversary of our incident, the Malaysian Minister of Transport announced that they are considering new proposals to search underwater, based on the latest theories that aim to pinpoint the location more accurately. The Malaysian Prime Minister confirmed his willingness to reopen the investigation if new evidence emerges. This decision is a result of the new theories developed by the volunteers who continued their search even after the official one ended. This shows that search and exploration are human instincts, but also the solidarity and unity during crises against violence, sabotage, and destruction were clearly evident in the Malaysian. This was Addison with you on the show The Nerd.